It was supposed to be one of those simple, forgettable weekends, the kind that passes without note, wrapped in the soft blur of laughter, frosting, and the glow of a birthday candle. February 21st, 2013. A Thursday turned into Friday, and at the Faulkners' two-story home tucked into a cul-de-sac in Maple Glen, Pennsylvania, 5 girls gathered for a sleepover. It was Maren Faulkner's 9th birthday, and her parents had gone all out. Pizza, ice cream cake, balloons, glittery party bags. A folding table had been set up in the living room with snacks and soda, and a pile of gift wrap littered the corner by the fireplace. The girls giggled their way through board games and a movie, finally settling down sometime after 10:30. One by one, they crawled into their sleeping bags on the carpeted floor. The lights dimmed, and the house settled into the ordinary silence of a family falling asleep. The next morning, it was a different kind of silence. Maren's mother, Denise, came downstairs around 7:15 to start coffee. The sun was just barely breaking through a soft gray sky. She tiptoed around the scattered party cups, smiling at the mess, and peeked into the living room to find the girls still bundled in a half circle, all except one. Lily Darrow's sleeping bag was empty, neatly zipped halfway up. At first, Denise assumed she was in the bathroom, but the light was off. Then maybe the kitchen. She checked. No Lily. A few minutes passed. She called out upstairs. Nothing. Now, uneasy, she gently nudged Maren awake and asked where Lily had gone. Maren blinked groggily and said, "She was right there." The other girls stirred and sat up, confused. By 7:45, Denise had woken her husband Thomas, and they began checking every room. They called Lily's name, opened closets, even checked the garage. The back patio door was locked, so was the front. Nothing was broken, nothing was out of place. Her pink sneakers were still lined up neatly by the front door, right where she'd left them the night before. Her overnight bag was untouched, and on the arm of the couch, her stuffed fox, Maple, soft with worn seams and a fraying ear, sat like it always did in sleepovers past. Denise called Lily's mother, who answered on the second ring. At first, it was just confusion. Maybe Lily had walked home early, but the Darrows lived 2 streets over, and Lily had never been allowed to walk alone. Besides, it was barely 8. When Denise explained that they'd already searched the house, panic began to rise. Lily's mother hung up and drove over immediately. By 8:20, both families were searching the surrounding neighborhood. Neighbors came out in robes. One jogger said she'd seen nothing out of the ordinary. A woman walking her dog recalled hearing faint talking late in the night, but couldn't say from where. By 8:45, 911 was called. The dispatcher logged it as a missing child. Officers arrived within 20 minutes. They asked all the usual questions. Was Lily upset? Did she say anything about wanting to go home? Was there any chance she'd sleepwalked? But the answers led nowhere. Lily wasn't known for sleepwalking. She was shy but content. She'd attended school the previous day. Her grades were fine. She was excited about the party. Everyone had seen her smiling in photos. A K-9 unit was dispatched just after 10 a.m. Officers cordoned off the Faulkner house and began a formal search, both inside and out. Forensics took photos of every room. The living room showed no sign of disturbance, no overturned furniture, no sign of a struggle. Her sleeping bag looked hardly used. A single pink sock was found inside. The front and back doors were intact and locked from the inside. Windows were closed. The dog sniffed Lily's pajamas and began a wide search pattern around the neighborhood. But the trail never fully formed. It circled the house once, then seemed to hesitate at the side yard, only to lose the scent near the trash bins and retreat back toward the porch. Officers checked the bins, then the crawl space under the house. Nothing. No scent continued toward the sidewalk, the street, or the nearby wooded edge. It was as if Lily had simply evaporated. By late afternoon, the news began to spread. A reverse 911 call went out. Helicopters were requested. Social media flooded with missing posters bearing Lily's second-grade photo. Brown hair, bright eyes, a gap in her teeth from a missing front incisor. She wore a lavender pajama set with little white bears. No one remembered if she'd changed clothes before bed. There were no video cameras inside the home, no surveillance footage on the quiet street. Investigators interviewed each of the girls from the sleepover. Most recalled the movie, the popcorn, the lights going out. A couple of them vaguely remembered Lily saying she was cold. One thought she heard someone walking around upstairs sometime after midnight, but none of it pointed to anything solid. No arguments, no crying. No one admitted seeing her after they zipped into their bags. By nightfall, search crews were combing the nearby woods with flashlights and thermal drones. But there were no broken branches, no footprints in the soft mud, no discarded pajamas. Nothing. The night came cold and windless, and still, Lily Darrow was simply gone. And inside the house she vanished from, Maple the stuffed fox still sat on the armrest, facing the front door, waiting for a girl who never left through it. By the second day, Maple Glen wasn't just anxious, it was paralyzed. The kind of stillness that doesn't settle but hangs like a question in the air. Flyers bearing Lily Darrow's photo were already taped to gas pumps, grocery store doors, and telephone poles. On the town Facebook group, dozens of residents shared memories, leads, theories, anything they could think of. Lily had gone to school with their kids. She'd trick-or-treated on their porches. She'd held the door at the library, giggled at swim lessons, waited in line at the corner deli for gummy worms. She wasn't the kind of girl who just vanished. And yet, somehow, she had. By Monday morning, the Faulkner home, blue shutters, wreath still hanging from winter, had become the quiet center of chaos. Yellow police tape stretched across the hedges, crime scene vans parked in the cul-de-sac like heavy punctuation marks. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as state investigators walked in with kits and clipboards, their faces tight. Drones scanned the woods behind the property. Officers walked shoulder to shoulder through leaf piles and frost-bitten brush, calling Lily's name. The house itself became more than a house. It was sealed, cataloged, measured, and dissected. The basement was searched for hidden entrances. The attic, insulation, crawl spaces, and wall vents were all opened or drilled. Cadaver dogs were brought in, noses to the floorboards, muzzles sniffing near closets, ducts and air returns. The dogs circled but gave no alert. No blood, no scent, no human remains. Still, the house was treated as both a potential crime scene and a time capsule. Every detail preserved, even the half-drunk cups of apple juice from the night of the party. Reporters arrived by Tuesday, local stations first, then regional affiliates. A missing child always drew attention, but this one was different. There was something unbearable about it. A sleepover, a birthday, a house full of people. And somehow, one girl just gone. Denise and Thomas Faulkner made a short statement, trembling before the cameras, begging for anyone with information to come forward. But already, the questions had shifted. Why had the sleeping bag looked so untouched? Why was the stuffed fox still on the couch if she had wandered off? Why didn't anyone hear the door? Investigators returned to the only witnesses they had, the 4 little girls who'd slept next to Lily on the floor. Each one was interviewed separately by trained child psychologists. They were nervous, some cried, some didn't understand what was happening. But a pattern began to emerge. None of them saw Lily after the movie ended. Most fell asleep before midnight. No one remembered her getting up, except one. Maren Faulkner. She told the therapist something she hadn't said before. Around maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, she didn't have a clock, she couldn't be sure. She woke up to go to the bathroom. The hallway light was off, but she thought she heard whispering from upstairs. Just a voice, a few words. She couldn't make them out. She thought maybe someone else had gotten up, maybe her brother, maybe her mom, so she didn't check. She just went back to sleep. Investigators logged the statement but didn't press hard. At 9 years old, memory is fluid. Dreams mix with reality. Sounds get misplaced. But it was the first and only mention of something unusual. During that window of time, something unaccounted for. It was also the first time Kyle Faulkner's name entered the case file. Kyle was 17, a senior at the local high school. By all accounts, quiet, kept to himself, into computers, music, and photography. No arrests, no history of violence. He'd told police during the initial search that he was out that night at his friend Brent's house across town, staying up late playing video games. His parents confirmed that version of events. So did Brent. There was no reason to suspect otherwise. Still, detectives returned to the Faulkners' internet logs. They found something small. At 12:43 a.m., the night of the party, the family's upstairs Wi-Fi router showed activity. Someone had logged into a device registered as KFCam_laptop. It connected for 17 minutes, then went silent again. Investigators flagged it. It didn't mean anything on its own, but it became the first shadow on Kyle's alibi. Meanwhile, public opinion started to fracture. Some blamed the Faulkners, some defended them. Online forums buzzed with theories. One neighbor, anonymously, told a reporter she never liked the energy in that house. Another swore she saw a car idling by the woods the week before. A local pastor offered a prayer vigil. Volunteers formed search parties that combed the creek beds, drainage tunnels, and even abandoned hunting cabins 10 miles out. Police followed every lead, some promising, most not. No footprints, no fibers, no drag marks, no broken windows, no screams, nothing. A week passed, then 2. Lily's parents stopped sleeping. Her father returned every night to the Faulkner Street, just walking, just looking. Her mother began calling psychics. Every day the house stayed sealed, and every day the absence grew heavier. Maren stopped talking at school. The girls who were at the sleepover started seeing counselors. One had nightmares. Another refused to go to sleepovers again. A third told her mother she heard breathing in her closet at night. Behind closed doors, investigators met privately. Someone in that house had to know something, whether it was an accident or something worse. There was no scenario in which Lily Darrow simply disappeared on her own, barefoot, without a trace. Someone had been awake. Someone had heard more than they admitted. But without evidence, without a witness, and without a body, suspicion wasn't enough. And Maple Glen, still decorated in yellow ribbons and hope, entered the second month of waiting. By the third week, suspicion no longer whispered. It lingered. It filled the space where answers should have been. Detectives, already exhausted from dead ends and public pressure, circled back to the beginning, the sleepover itself. The moment Lily Darrow stepped into that house, something set in motion that no one could reverse. So they began again, not with footprints or forensics or search grids, but with a guest list. There were 5 girls invited: Lily Darrow, Maren Faulkner, Ava Royce, Jenna Hallstrom, and Nia Patel. All 9 years old, all classmates, all familiar to one another, if not exactly close. They'd played together on playgrounds, shared classrooms, and birthday parties. The kind of age where friendships weren't deep, but they were loyal. Parents of all 5 were interviewed again, not just for memories, but for doubts. One of them had been harboring one. Annabelle Royce, Ava's mother, admitted something she hadn't shared before. She almost didn't let her daughter attend, not because of Lily or Maren or the other girls, but because of the older brother, Kyle Faulkner. She'd heard things, through other moms at PTA from her own niece at the high school, that Kyle had a temper, that he was moody, that he'd been suspended the previous year after an incident in class. She wasn't sure what the incident was, just that he was off, and that she didn't feel right about it. But Eva had begged to go. She didn't want to be the only one left out. So Annabelle said yes. And now, she said, she would never forgive herself. Investigators requested Kyle's school records. What they found wasn't damning, but it wasn't comforting either. Kyle had been suspended once during his junior year for what the school called inappropriate interaction with another student, though no charges were ever filed. Teachers noted he was bright but disengaged. One called him isolated. Another flagged his senior project, an independent study about digital surveillance and hiding metadata, as concerningly obsessive. But again, none of it was criminal, nothing actionable, just patterns. Kyle maintained the same story, that he'd spent the night of the party at his friend Brent's house playing Call of Duty until sunrise. Brent confirmed it. They'd eaten pizza, stayed up late, crashed on the couch. It was simple, familiar, forgettable. But when police pushed for more detail, what time did he arrive? What time did Brent's parents go to bed? Who was still awake at 12:30, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock? The answers got fuzzier. Brent's parents weren't home. They'd gone out of town. It was just the two of them. No one to independently confirm anything. Then came the router logs. Investigators re-reviewed the Wi-Fi activity from the Faulkner house on the night Lily vanished. At 12:43 a.m., a device labeled KFCam_laptop had connected to the upstairs router. The IP address showed it pinged a YouTube page, ran for 17 minutes, then disconnected. The signal came from the second floor, from the far bedroom at the end of the hall. Kyle's room. When shown this information, Kyle didn't blink. He said he must have left the laptop home, maybe on sleep mode. Maybe it auto-connected. Maybe someone else used it. He didn't know. He didn't remember. But he hadn't been there, he insisted. He hadn't been in the house that night. The problem was, no one else could have used that laptop. Kyle's devices were password protected, fingerprint locked. Investigators noted the improbability, but also the frustrating absence of proof. There were no prints, no time-stamped photos, no surveillance in the house. Just a flicker in the data, a gap in the story, and a timeline that refused to settle. One detective off the record would later say, it was like the house itself was lying. That week, Maren Faulkner was asked again about the night of her party. She was quieter this time, guarded. When gently asked if she remembered anything else, a sound, a door, someone walking, she said something unexpected. She said Kyle's door was open when she passed it on her way to the bathroom. Just slightly, just a crack. She thought he wasn't home. But the next morning, she found it closed. Investigators asked why she hadn't mentioned it earlier. Maren shrugged. I don't know, she said. I didn't think it mattered. That small detail, a door that moved between night and morning, added just enough weight for a follow-up warrant. Police requested Kyle's laptop. It had since been wiped. A factory reset performed just weeks after the disappearance. When asked about it, Kyle said he was applying to colleges and wanted a clean slate. No one could disprove that either. And so the case hung again in limbo. Media coverage reignited. Kyle's name was never formally released to the public, but rumors spread. His photo circulated in online forums. Faulkner boy killed that girl, one anonymous comment read. Another said, he's hiding something. Look at his eyes. The Faulkners issued a statement defending their son. They said he was a good kid, that he'd cooperated fully, that the tragedy had turned their lives inside out. Denise Faulkner, visibly shaking in a recorded interview, said her family was being destroyed over something they didn't do. Still, the town whispered. At school, Kyle walked through hallways with a target on his back. At work, Thomas Faulkner was asked to take an indefinite leave. Maren stopped inviting friends over. Even Lily's classmates had begun avoiding one another, unsure what was safe to say, what was real. In the end, no charges were filed. Not yet. Not without a body. Not without direct evidence. But in the minds of many, suspicion had already done what prosecution could not. A child was gone. And someone in that house wasn't telling the truth. By the time the Faulkners left Maple Glen, the house had become more than a home. It was a wound, the kind people pointed at when they walked by with their kids, the one whispered about at barbecues and school pickup lines. It didn't matter that no charges were ever filed, or that the police never confirmed a single theory. For the town, the story had already been written, and the house, that house, was the last place Lily Darrow had ever been seen. They moved in the fall of 2014, quietly. No for sale sign, no goodbye party. Just a moving truck in the driveway one morning, a few boxes, a note taped to the door for the realtor. The property changed hands quickly. Then again a few years later. Each new family stayed a little less time. It became one of those houses that always seemed to be in transition, repainted, re-landscaped, relisted. By 2023, nearly a decade after Lily vanished, the neighborhood had shifted. Kids had grown. A new elementary school was built 2 miles over. The case wasn't talked about much anymore, not openly, not like before, but the house still sat there, a little too quiet, a little too clean, like it didn't know how to be lived in. That spring, a young couple moved in, expecting their first child. Her name was Sarah. His was Jordan. They'd been living in the city, tired of traffic and noise, and bought the property for a good price, even with the odd history. The disclosures had been vague. They knew there'd been a police investigation related to a missing person, but not much more. Jordan didn't care. Sarah hesitated, but the nursery faced the east yard where the light came in soft and steady. That sealed it. By August, they'd started renovations. The closet in the upstairs room, the one that would become the baby's, was narrow and oddly shaped. It jutted out in a way that made arranging furniture difficult. Jordan thought maybe the space behind it could be reclaimed, maybe even a built-in. He started pulling drywall. It wasn't a big job, but then his hammer bounced against something that felt empty. Not soft, not solid, just wrong. He paused, knocked again, hollow, but not like a pipe or insulation, deeper, like an entire pocket, a hidden cavity. Jordan cut a clean square through the sheetrock and pulled it free. Dust spilled out, thick and stale. Behind it, nothing at first, just darkness. Then he saw it, a bundle of fabric. At first he thought it was debris. Then he saw the pattern, faded pink and lavender, bears and moons. Next to it a small sock, child-sized, white with a red heel, and tucked between them what looked like torn paper, stained and curled. He pulled it carefully. On the back was a smudge of glitter and the faint outline of a cartoon unicorn, the kind printed on party wrap. He didn't touch anything else. Sarah called 911. When officers arrived, the couple was waiting outside. Jordan had sealed the nursery door with painter's tape and refused to go back in. The responding officers opened the closet and shined a light into the cavity. What they saw wasn't a body, but it was something that hadn't seen air in years. A deteriorated sleeping bag, flattened by time, the sock, the scrap of paper, no blood, no bones. But the implication was enough. Within hours, the property was sealed again. Evidence markers, photographers, crime scene, tape fluttered from the porch railing. For the first time in nearly a decade, police entered the Faulkners' old house with new purpose. The room, small, slanted ceiling, corner window, had once belonged to Kyle. Old blue paint still showed through behind the fresh coat. The closet hadn't been original to the house. It had been added, walled in, during a renovation Kyle's father had done himself back in 2012. Records showed it was part of a music soundproofing project, filed without permits. The cavity behind the drywall was narrow, just over 4 feet deep and maybe 2 feet wide. A child could fit, but not comfortably, and not by accident. When forensics arrived, they sealed off the space and began slow extraction. The fabric was bagged, the sock too. DNA swabs were taken from the wrapping paper. The sleeping bag lining was deteriorated but intact enough for testing. Preliminary results came within 48 hours. The sock, Lily Darrow's, confirmed by DNA. The sleeping bag was identical to the one she'd brought to the sleepover. The color matched. The pattern matched. The wrapping paper bore faint traces of glitter adhesive, the same kind used on Marin Faulkner's birthday gift bags. But no human remains were found. No blood, no tissue. Nothing to confirm how long the items had been there, only that they were there. In a wall that had no reason to exist, in a room that once belonged to a boy whose story never quite added up. And just like that, what had gone cold for 10 years ignited again. The Darrows were notified first. Lily's mother didn't speak for nearly a minute, then asked, "Are you sure?" The detective answered softly, "Yes, ma'am." It's hers. The news reached the press by the next morning. A 10-year-old mystery, a sealed wall, a child's possessions hidden behind drywall in her friend's brother's bedroom. The case wasn't cold anymore. And for the first time in a decade, investigators knew exactly where to look next. The house on Willow Creek Lane was sealed off again, but this time it wasn't out of caution or suspicion. It was evidence. The kind that had waited, buried and breathless, for 10 long years. The forensic team moved carefully through the upstairs room, documenting every angle of the closet, every inch of the hidden cavity. It wasn't just strange construction, it was deliberate. The dimensions were too precise, the drywall too cleanly cut, the insulation too carefully repacked around the hidden space. Someone had known exactly what they were doing. The sleeping bag was removed first, laid out flat in a sterile containment tent on the front lawn. Time had softened the colors, but the pattern was still recognizable. Pastel moons and stars, the same kind Lily had brought to that party. DNA from the interior lining confirmed it had been used by her. The sock pulled from the corner was tested and matched through mitochondrial DNA to samples the Darrows had provided a decade earlier. It was hers. The glitter wrapping paper showed traces of adhesive used on the party favor bags from that night. Then came the real discovery. Luminol tests inside the cavity lit up faint traces of blood, not in large quantities, but enough to confirm an injury had occurred. Along the edge of a baseboard, beneath dust and decay, a single smear had dried into the wood grain. Forensic analysis revealed it to be human blood, too degraded for a full profile, but enough for a partial match. It wasn't just consistent with Lily's blood type, it was almost certainly hers. Still, nothing could confirm how she had died. No remains, no bones, no teeth, no clothing beyond what had already been identified. But the story the evidence told was starting to take shape. Someone had built a chamber, someone had placed or forced a child into it, someone had sealed it shut, and no one had ever come forward. Detectives moved quickly. The current homeowners were cleared. Jordan and Sarah had only just moved in, and their purchase had come from a different owner altogether. They'd known nothing. But the name on the original remodeling permit from 2012 matched the former owner, Thomas Faulkner. Within 24 hours, the Faulkners were located. They were living in upstate New York now. Quiet town, smaller home, no kids left under the roof. Thomas had retired. Denise worked part-time at a bakery. When detectives arrived, they were polite, cooperative, caught off guard. They were asked if they remembered building the closet. They said yes. Thomas said it was for Kyle, that he'd wanted more storage for music gear. He'd helped him build it over a weekend. Nothing suspicious, nothing hidden. When told what had been discovered behind that wall, Thomas went pale. Denise cried. They were brought back to Pennsylvania for formal questioning. Denise trembled through most of it. She kept saying, "We didn't know, over and over, but then the subject turned to Kyle, and something shifted. They hadn't spoken to him in months, not since he moved west. He was 27 now, still single, still drifting between jobs, always in tech, always remote. When they called him to explain what had happened, he hung up. Then sent a one-line text. "Talk to my lawyer." He refused to return, refused to cooperate, refused to say anything at all. That, in itself, didn't prove guilt, but it did something else. It reignited the fire beneath a case that had long gone cold. Detectives reassembled the original team, now joined by forensic anthropologists, digital analysts, and criminal psychologists. They pored over the old case files, timelines, interview notes. They rebuilt Lily's final night from the ground up. A new timeline emerged. 10:17 p.m. Girls begin settling down for the movie. 10:42 p.m. Lights out, everyone in sleeping bags. 11:56 p.m. Last Wi-Fi ping from the living room. Roku. 12:43 a.m. KFCam_laptop connects upstairs for 17 minutes. Sometime around 1 a.m., Marin hears whispering upstairs. Morning. Lily's gone. No sign of forced entry. Shoes still inside. The KFCam laptop had been a mystery for years. Now, with Kyle silent, it became something else entirely, a breadcrumb he had hoped would disappear. Investigators began re-examining the hard drives recovered during the original search. While Kyle had wiped his primary device, they found an external backup drive preserved in evidence. It had never been thoroughly analyzed. Now, it was given priority. Digital forensics began deep scans, file recovery, metadata reconstruction. It would take weeks. In the meantime, they tracked down Kyle's high school friend Brent, the one who'd provided his original alibi. Brent was older now, married, a father. He agreed to meet with detectives, and what he told them cracked open the case. He said Kyle had never actually spent the whole night at his house. He'd come by that evening. Yes. They'd played games. Yes. But around midnight, Kyle left. Said he forgot something at home. Said he'd be right back. But he didn't return until after 3 a.m. Brent hadn't mentioned it back then because, in his words, I didn't want to throw him under the bus. Now it was too late for silence. Detectives drafted a formal request for Kyle's immediate detainment and prepared a warrant for his digital records. They knew he was hiding something. They just didn't know how much. But one thing had finally become clear. The house hadn't given up everything. Not yet. But it had spoken. And someone, somewhere, was running out of places to hide. When an investigation turns cold, what's left behind often gathers dust in boxes no one opens. Paperwork, forgotten leads, bagged evidence, recordings made before anyone understood what they were seeing. In the wake of the new discovery, detectives ordered a full retrieval of the original case files from 2013. Every drawer, every label, every disk and drive. There were over 100 hours of material, body cam footage, neighbor interviews, school reports. But what stood out came not from the police, but from a parent. It was cataloged simply as Faulkner Party, February 21st, a mini DV camcorder tape submitted voluntarily during the first week of the search. At the time, it had been marked no evidentiary value. Now, with fresh eyes, it became something else. The footage began with birthday balloons bobbing near the ceiling, plates of cupcakes on the dining room table, girls dancing in a loose circle in front of the TV. One of the moms, likely Ava Royce's, narrates softly over the recording, chuckling as the girls sing karaoke into plastic microphones. The timestamp reads 8:52 p.m. The footage is shaky but warm. Lily appears briefly near the edge of the frame, giggling, spinning in her socks. Her hair is pulled back with a glitter clip. She's wearing a lavender pajama set. She sings a few bars of the song, then disappears behind another girl. It lasts maybe 20 seconds, but then the camera pans briefly as the adult tries to zoom in. And that's when it happens. There, just over the girl's shoulders, blurred and shadowed, is the upstairs railing. And behind it, visible only for 2 or 3 seconds, is a figure. Male. Older. Watching. The image is grainy but undeniable. He's standing still, one hand on the banister, head tilted slightly forward. The outline of his hoodie is familiar, the shape of his jaw, the expression unreadable, but the presence unmistakable. It's Kyle Faulkner. He wasn't at his friend's house across town. He hadn't left before the party began. He was standing at the top of the stairs, watching the girls. The timestamp makes it clear. 8:52 p.m., nearly 2 hours after he'd claimed to be gone. The tape is shown to the lead investigators. They watch it twice, then a third time. Still frames are printed and enhanced. Facial recognition software runs a match against school ID photos from 2013. 94% confidence. They bring the footage to the Faulkners' new home in upstate New York. Denise and Thomas sit at the kitchen table, the detective's laptop screen turned toward them. They're asked to watch. Denise covers her mouth the moment she sees the figure. Her face goes still. She doesn't speak for a long time. Then she whispers, "I thought he left earlier that day." Thomas doesn't respond. He just stares, eyes unfocused, as if he's looking not at the video but through it, back at something he'd forgotten how to see. It was the first time either parent truly acknowledged that Kyle had been in the house. The video was enough to destroy his alibi, but not yet enough to file charges. Still, the walls were closing in. Detectives called Kyle's attorney, requesting voluntary questioning. They received no response. Instead, Kyle deleted all of his public social media accounts the next day. His cell phone pinged in a small coastal town in Oregon. Then, nothing. Back in Pennsylvania, the investigation gained new life. Detectives began re-interviewing the original guests of the party, now young adults. Some had moved away. Some still lived nearby. Most had tried to forget. Ava Royce, the girl whose mother had filmed the tape, said she didn't remember much about that night, but when shown the footage, her eyes narrowed. "I remember someone watching us," she said. "I thought it was Marin's dad." Jenna Hallstrom said she had a vague memory of hearing a creak on the stairs, but chalked it up to the house settling. Nia Patel remembered nothing unusual. Marin Faulkner, now 19, refused to speak at all. But the details, even fragmented, were starting to align. The creaking step, the open door, the whispering Marin thought she'd heard upstairs. And now, visual confirmation. Kyle had been there. The tape was released internally to the DA's office. Prosecutors began preliminary review for potential charges. The term obstruction was floated. So was tampering with evidence. But what everyone wanted, what they needed, was the truth about what happened between 9 p.m. and sunrise. The child seen in that video, Lily Darrow, never left that house. That much was clear now. And the boy standing in the shadows above her, whose name had lingered like fog for a decade, was no longer just a rumor in the margins of a cold case. He had been right there, watching. And this time, the camera had watched back. The deeper the investigators dug, the more the house began to speak, not in screams or stains or obvious clues, but in measurements, in permits, in angles that didn't line up with the blueprints. A construction report filed under the Faulkner's address from late 2012 had gone unnoticed during the initial search. It wasn't issued by a licensed contractor, just a homeowner exemption request signed by Thomas Faulkner, stating the intention to install additional closet storage and light soundproofing. At the time, it had seemed like nothing, a dad building shelves for his son's music gear. But now, under new scrutiny, it became something else entirely. Investigators tracked down the man who sold Thomas the supplies. His name was Rick Mantley, a retired contractor who used to run a small lumber and hardware business just outside of Maple Glen. When asked if he remembered the Faulkners, he nodded slowly, then said something strange. It wasn't Thomas who asked the questions. It was Kyle. He wanted to know about soundproofing, Rick said, not just for volume. He kept asking about making it disappear. Said he needed it really quiet. Asked if I knew anything about studio-grade materials on the cheap. Even asked if I'd ever built a false wall before. That phrase, false wall, rang louder than any forensic report. Rick described Kyle as quiet, intense, polite, but strange. He remembered thinking the kid seemed more interested in hiding something than storing it, but he sold him the supplies anyway. Plywood, insulation, green glue, acoustic panels. Kyle paid in cash. Investigators mapped out the dimensions of the hidden cavity in Kyle's room against the known layout of the house. It didn't line up with any conventional storage design. It wasn't a box. It was a wedge, narrowing toward the corner, intentionally difficult to access. It hadn't been built for convenience. It had been built for concealment. The closet wasn't just a renovation. It was a decision. Next, detectives turned to Kyle's high school. Yearbooks, old teachers, former classmates. Most remembered him vaguely, the kid who kept to himself. The one who ate lunch alone, wore the same hoodie every day, spent hours in the computer lab. But a few remembered more. One classmate, a girl named Lexi Moran, said Kyle had an obsession with escape rooms and puzzles. Not the fun kind. The kind where you had to figure out how to get out of locked places. She said he used to joke that every house has a hollow part. You just have to know where to push. Another boy, Carter Venn, said Kyle once gave a presentation on an inventor who lived in underground chambers and studied sensory deprivation. He was really into isolation tanks, Carter said. Talked about how silence could drive people insane if they weren't ready for it. He thought that was interesting. When asked if Kyle had any history of violence, Carter hesitated, then said there was a rumor once that Kyle had trapped a younger kid in a janitor's closet during a school lock-in. No one ever reported it, and the story faded. But it stayed with him, especially now. The pieces were starting to align, not just technically, but psychologically. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment crime. It was something built, measured, installed, Kyle hadn't panicked and hidden Lily. He had created a space in which someone could disappear, and he had done it months before she ever arrived. The question now wasn't just what had happened to Lily Darrow. It was when. Detectives revisited the original search photos. The closet in Kyle's room had been dusted, opened, even partially emptied. But no one had checked for new construction behind it. At the time, there had been no probable cause to start pulling down walls. Now, they knew, the theory forming was haunting, that Lily, scared, confused, possibly injured, may have been placed into the crawl space alive, that the chamber had been designed to keep sound from getting out, that her disappearance wasn't just a cover-up, it was a containment, and that the bedroom door, once closed, had stayed closed for a reason. Detectives reviewed one final detail: Maren Faulkner's offhand memory. She'd said in an earlier interview that her brother's door had been open when she passed it around 1 a.m. the night of the sleepover. But when she woke up the next morning, it was shut. At the time, it had seemed like nothing, a blur in a child's memory. But now it became a hinge point in the story. 2 states of that door: open, then closed. The window between them, roughly 4 hours. Plenty of time to lure a child upstairs, plenty of time to coax her into a quiet place with promises, maybe a game, a hiding spot, a trick. Maybe she was sleepy. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she trusted him even then. And once inside, once she was no longer crying or calling out, that door had closed, twice. First the one that led to the hallway, then the one inside the wall. And no one opened either again. For 10 years, she hadn't said a word. Not to her friends, not to her teachers, not even to the therapists her parents sent her to after the case went cold. Maren Faulkner had lived in the silence of that house longer than anyone. She had moved through it as a child, then grown into its shadow. She'd been 9 years old when Lily vanished, and she'd been asleep, supposedly, just a few feet away when it happened. Detectives had questioned her back then, of course, several times, always gently. She'd said what the other girls had said, that they watched a movie, fell asleep, and woke up to find Lily gone. The only difference was that offhand comment about hearing whispering upstairs. She hadn't pushed it, and no one pushed her. She was a child. But now she wasn't. She was 19, living in a college dorm 2 hours away, majoring in psychology, still quiet, still private. But something had shifted. Maybe it was the news breaking again. Maybe it was seeing her brother's face in old headlines. Maybe it was hearing Lily's name repeated by strangers who finally knew she hadn't wandered off. When detectives asked to speak with her again, she didn't hesitate. She agreed to meet in person. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She didn't ask her parents to come. She just showed up. And what she said changed everything. Maren sat across from the lead investigator, palms flat on her knees, eyes steady but hollow. She said there was something she had never told anyone, not during the initial investigation, not when her parents begged her to try and remember, not when she woke up crying for weeks after the party and no one knew why. It happened the night after Lily disappeared, not the night of the party, but the next one. The house had been full of people all day, police, neighbors, reporters outside. Her parents hadn't slept. Her brother barely spoke. Everything was loud and quiet at the same time. That night, she couldn't fall asleep. The house felt off, too still, like everyone was pretending something wasn't wrong. She got up to use the bathroom around midnight, and when she passed Kyle's room, she noticed the door was slightly open. Inside, she heard it, a sound, not loud, not clear, but enough to freeze her, crying, not sobbing, just quiet, broken crying. She took a step closer, hand on the edge of the door. That's when her mother appeared behind her. She didn't speak loudly, didn't panic. She just said, "Don't bother him. He's in one of his moods," then gently but firmly pulled Maren away. The next morning, Kyle's door was closed, and no one mentioned it again. Maren said she tried to forget. She told herself it was stress, that maybe she imagined it, that maybe it was just Kyle, upset about everything. But something always stayed wrong in her chest. She remembered asking her mom about it a week later, just once, and her mom had looked at her and said, "There's nothing to talk about. Do you understand?" So she didn't. Not for 10 years. And now, sitting in that interview room, she said she couldn't keep it in anymore. When asked directly if she believed Lily had still been in the house that night, alive, Maren didn't speak. She just looked down at her hands and nodded once. That single admission, not rumor, not memory, but witnessed behavior, was enough. Enough for a judge to authorize a warrant for the arrest of Kyle Faulkner, obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and potential homicide. By the time the warrant was signed, Kyle's digital footprint had narrowed. After going silent in Oregon, he'd stopped using his personal devices. But a VPN trace linked his old email to a remote freelance contract out of a co-working space in Tacoma, Washington. Detectives coordinated with local law enforcement. Surveillance was established. Within days, he was located. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He was taken into custody and placed in a holding cell pending extradition. When informed of the charges, he blinked once, then looked at the floor. Back in Pennsylvania, the news broke like thunder. After a decade of grief, doubt, and suspicion, someone was finally being held accountable. And at the center of it was a girl who had seen too much, said too little, and carried the weight of what she almost heard for far too long. Maren Faulkner had lived her entire life wondering if what she heard was real. Now she knew. And now, so did everyone else. It took nearly 5 hours. At first, Kyle Faulkner said nothing. He sat with his elbows on the cold steel table, head down, eyes fixed on the corner of a folded paper cup filled with water. 2 investigators were present. A recorder clicked on. The questions began gently. Background, timeline, inconsistencies in his alibi. For a while he gave the same answers he always had. He didn't know. He didn't remember. He wasn't there. But the silence had grown heavier. He knew they had the tape. He knew about the DNA, the Wi-Fi logs, the closet. He knew his sister had finally told the truth. What broke him wasn't a piece of evidence. It was a question. Simple. Quiet. What was she doing when she followed you? He looked up, just once, not at the detective, past him, at something in the air. Then he whispered, "She asked me if I was okay." The rest came slowly, uneven, like something that had been buried for so long it didn't know how to surface. He said he'd been drinking. Not a lot, but enough. He'd stolen 2 beers from the garage fridge before the party started, kept them hidden under his bed. He was angry that night, said he didn't want a bunch of little girls running through the house, said he felt invisible, useless, that no one listened to him. Around midnight, he slipped downstairs to grab a charger from the kitchen. He didn't want to be seen. He was barefoot, trying not to make noise. That's when Lily woke up. She saw him by the stairs and stood up, still wrapped in her sleeping bag. She whispered his name, Kyle, and asked if he was okay. That's all. Just a question. He said he panicked. Something in him snapped. Maybe it was the beer. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe he just didn't want to be seen. He told her to go back to sleep, but she stepped closer. She said his name again. He turned too fast, pushed her. She fell. Her head hit the corner of the bottom stair. She didn't scream, but she didn't get up either. He knelt down, checked her breathing, said she was out cold. He thought maybe she was just stunned. He didn't want to wake his parents, didn't want to get in trouble. So he picked her up, carried her upstairs into his room. At first, he said, he didn't know what to do. He laid her on the floor, waited, but she didn't move, didn't speak. He thought maybe it would be better if she just slept. Maybe she'd wake up in the morning and everything would go back to normal. Then he remembered the wall, the crawl space he'd built months earlier, a soundproof pocket no one knew about. He said he opened the panel, slid her inside gently, laid her down on the sleeping bag he used for sound testing, said he tucked her in. Just for a little while, just until she woke up. Then he sealed the panel and never opened it again. He said he listened for a while, thought he heard her breathing. Then nothing. The next morning, he waited. heard the panic, heard his parents downstairs, heard the police arrive. He stayed in his room, pretended to be confused. He never went back in, never checked, never told anyone. He said he thought if no one found her, maybe she hadn't really been there. He said he convinced himself it hadn't happened, that he hadn't done anything wrong, that she was just gone. But when pressed, when asked why he built the crawlspace in the first place, he fell silent again. He didn't answer. When asked why he never told the truth, he said this: "I sealed her in like a secret, because that's what she became." There was no expression on his face when he said it, no tears, just exhaustion. The detectives didn't move for a long time. They just sat there, the sound of the HVAC hum filling the room. The confession was on tape, word for word. He was charged that afternoon: voluntary manslaughter, concealment of a corpse, obstruction of justice. The legal language didn't seem to capture it. A child had been left behind a wall, not because she had to be, but because someone couldn't face what they'd done. Back in Maple Glen, word spread fast. Some said it had always been obvious. Others were stunned. But the Darrow family, who had spent 10 years not knowing, finally had an answer that didn't make anything right. But at least, at long last, it made sense of the silence. They buried her on a warm day in June. No clouds, no wind, just sun pressing gently against the shoulders of those who had waited 10 years for something they had once hoped they'd never need: closure in the form of a coffin. Lily Darrow was laid to rest in the Maple Glen Cemetery, 2 rows down from her grandfather, 3 over from a teacher who once taught her the alphabet. Her headstone was small, white marble, engraved with a fox curled in sleep. It was what she used to draw in the margins of her notebooks, always with big eyes and a crooked tail. The ceremony was brief. Her parents stood hand in hand, thinner now, quieter than they'd been when the cameras first swarmed their street a decade ago. A generation of grief had worn into them like weather into stone. Friends, neighbors, former classmates, they all came. Some hadn't spoken in years, fractured by suspicion, guilt, or time. But now, together, they wept. There were no questions left to ask. After the trial, a full excavation of the crawlspace had been ordered by the court. Structural engineers and forensic teams worked carefully to dismantle the false wall, beam by beam. What they found confirmed everything Kyle had confessed, and more. The sleeping bag was still in place. Beneath it, layers of dust and skin cells, too degraded for collection. In the far left corner, tucked behind a joint in the frame, a small piece of fabric was recovered, part of a pajama cuff, lavender with a faded white bear. But it was what they found on the wood that no one could forget. On the central support beam, just above where a child's shoulder might reach, were faint scratch marks. Shallow, uneven, desperate. Some curved downward like nails dragged through splinters. Others were lines, rows, counted off in 4s and crossed through with 5ths. No one could determine exactly how long she'd survived in there, hours, maybe more, and then, scrawled faintly across the inside of the drywall, just below eye level, one word: Lily, written in what may have been crayon or possibly blood. There was no punctuation, no last name, just her name, left like a signature, or maybe a plea. The image was photographed, documented, then preserved under clear acrylic, not for display, but for the record, for the truth. Kyle Faulkner pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter and unlawful disposal of a body. He showed no emotion during sentencing. When asked if he wished to speak, he declined. The judge called his actions cowardly, cruel, and calculated, and sentenced him to 18 to 25 years with no eligibility for parole until year 15. His parents, Thomas and Denise Faulkner, were never charged criminally, but they were named in 2 civil lawsuits filed by the Darrow family, one for negligence, the other for wrongful death. Depositions revealed that Denise had long suspected her son was unstable and that she'd downplayed concerns, even to herself. A private settlement was reached. Terms were sealed. The house was declared uninhabitable. Too many structural modifications, too much contamination, too much history. The township condemned it, officially on July 2nd. 2 weeks later, it was bulldozed. By then, no one protested. People came to watch, not many, but enough. Some brought folding chairs, others stood quietly by the curb. When the final wall fell, there was no applause, only silence. Maren Faulkner did not attend. She had left town. But Sarah and Jordan, the couple who had unknowingly unearthed the past while preparing a nursery, were there. They stood hand in hand, watching as the space that had hidden so much was reduced to rubble. Sarah was visibly pregnant now. She told a reporter afterward, "It wasn't just about what we found. It was about who we found. She needed to be known." In the weeks that followed, the community gathered for a candlelight vigil near the school Lily had once attended. Former teachers spoke. Her best friend, now 19, read a poem. The school planted a flowering dogwood tree with a small plaque that simply read, "She was always here." Because that was the truth. Lily Darrow had never wandered off. She hadn't been taken by a stranger, or slipped into the woods, or fled into the night. She had been there, all along, 2 walls away, behind paint and plaster, and the silence of a family that didn't know, or didn't want to know, what their son had done. For a decade, people had searched the town, the rivers, the edges of every possibility. But the answer had been inside a bedroom closet, a space that shouldn't have existed, a place that held her name.